Hello, everybody. Welcome to Raising Multilinguals Live. My name is Tetsu Young from Ask Tetsu.
And my name is Utelima Garibold from Utes International Lounge.
And I am Rita Rosenbach from multilingualparenting.com.
All right. I'm a little too excited. I hope I'm not going to be saying the wrong things here. But very excited today to have my good friend Jonty Yamisha join us today. And he's going to cover a very, very important topic. But before we get into the topic, first of all, Jonty and I, we met about, a year and a bit ago at the Langfest, which is an event that I organized in Montreal. He came as a participant, and we've been great friends since. We've even participated at the Polyglot conference in Japan, where he spoke about this topic. Jonty, welcome to our show. Please tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, and your daily work, I guess.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to be speaking with you all today. And it's flattering too, because I just never would have imagined that people would be interested in the life that I'm trying to build with my children. So I am an ethnic Circassian. There's not a whole lot of us in the world. There's about 5 million ethnic Circassians in the world, and approximately a little less than 1 million of us live in our ethnic homeland in the North Caucasus of the Russian Federation, and a little more than 4 million of us live outside of our homeland. So as a percentage, we are one of the largest diaspora nations in the world. The vast majority of our people do not speak our language. I run a small nonprofit foundation called the Nasip Foundation, which was it's a registered 501c3 recognized by the federal United States government. I live in Chicago. I'm from the United States. We estimate that of the 5 million Circassians in the world, less than 2 million speak Circassian. And we think that that number will drop by half over the next 20 or 30 years as elder heritage speakers pass on and children fail to speak the language. So I myself grew up not speaking the language. For a variety of reasons, I just never had the opportunity. And one day at the tender age of 31, which is over a decade ago, so you can kind of guess how old I am, I decided I was going to teach myself this language. And I've done so to the point that I often pass for a native speaker. My wife is a native speaker. She was born and raised in the Russian Federation. And we are here in Chicago raising our 2 children, our 3-year-old daughter and our son, who will turn 6 in just a month or so. And Circassian is their first language. Circassian is their first language. English is their second language. And then there's quite a bit of Russian that primarily my wife, but a lot of Russian that they understand and they speak as well. So that's kind of us in a nutshell. I'm the founder and CEO of Optilingo, which is a language learning mobile app. And really the way I think about it is Optilingo is my attempt to commercialize over a decade of experience in learning and teaching a variety of different languages. So that's me in a nutshell.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, Circassian, the first time I met you, I'm going to be honest, I did not know that about this language. And I was thinking, when I was talking with Rita and Uta about different guests to find, I always thought about parents who asked me about languages that are less accessible. And then right away, I thought, Jonty, you can't get anywhere less than accessible than Circassian, a language that I didn't even know existed. So definitely, I hope today's interview will help inspire a lot of parents out there with languages that are probably not as extreme as Circassian, but are in fact less accessible, or maybe not in written form or not documented. So there are ways around it. And today we're going to learn from you, Jonty.
Sure.
So yeah. You've already told us a little bit about Circassian, and you did say your wife is a native speaker, but you did tell me that you do OPO, which is one person, one language at your home, right? So what are the languages that you teach your kids specifically, including Circassian, and how? So who's OPO? Like, who are the people?
Yeah. Those are great questions. And it's funny, Tetsu, because it's actually a conversation that you and I have had on multiple occasions, because there is complexity in this. So before I met you, before I read your book, before I saw your lectures, my wife and I had stumbled into, we happily stumbled into this one person, one language protocol. And that's in stark difference and in stark contrast to a lot of other parents that I hear who say, well, I'm going to say everything in language A, and then I'm going to repeat it in language B so that the child won't get confused. In all candor, I'm not convinced that that's for the child's benefit. I think it's because one language is easier for the parent. And then what eventually ends up happening is one of those two languages becomes the primary language, right? And you're also giving the child an opportunity to cheat by answering in that other language. So we adhere almost religiously to, when I say almost religiously, I'm gonna say 98% of the time, we adhere to one parent, one language. And for us, it's Circassian. So any interaction that I have with my daughter or my son, any interaction that my wife has with my daughter or my son, 98% of the time, it's going to be Circassian. Now, there's some caveats to that. And I think that this is especially the case with a rarer language like Circassian. The first caveat is, why do I say 98%? Every now and again, almost in a semi-joking manner, we'll introduce a slang term, or we'll use a term that in all candor does not exist in our language. Okay, so for example, my son is doing kindergarten now. He's in kindergarten, and we're in Chicago. So he's doing kindergarten online, which is an odyssey. I'm not even going to get into it, right? So sometimes when my wife is supervising my son, she'll say, Osman, raise your hand, right? Because that's what the teacher says. Now, so that's an example where in the 98% of Circassian that she speaks to him, there's a little bit of a 2% where that's something she wants to reinforce because it's something that the teacher is saying. Or he might see, he saw SpongeBob the other day, and SpongeBob was an episode where somebody said, I'm gonna kick your butt, right? So every now and again, we'll be speaking Circassian, then hear something from SpongeBob, and I'm gonna kick your butt, right? So we'll introduce things like this as a joke or to reference popular culture, and that would be one of the 2% among the, you know. Now the other 1% of the, you know, 98% Circassian, 2% English, is when we just don't have words that exist in modern languages that are well maintained. So for example, there is no word for almost in my language, right? So depending on the context, we'll either use the Russian word, почти, or we'll just say almost, okay? My son, he seems to be gravitating towards math and science. There are no advanced terms for math or science in my language, right? So there are no words for addition or multiple. I mean, there's ways you could say addition, like zakathan, right? But zakathan would be the same word you would use to add ingredients to a recipe. It's not addition, it's literally adding one thing to another thing. It's a different meaning. So the equal sign, the multiplication sign, we don't have words like this. So oftentimes, you know, I gave my son a calculator the other day, and I was like, what's the number equal sign, right? So equal sign, you know, I work it into the conversation. So that's what dominates a lot of the conversation that we have and how we interact with them. Now, I also did reference that there is a little bit of Russian in the household as well. We think it's a useful language. My wife is a Russian citizen. My children hold Russian passports. We have a home in Russia. We have family in Russia. And, you know, it would be like, imagine I were an Irish kid in Chicago and I said, I'm going to teach my kids Gaelic. That's great, but I'm not going to teach them English. Well, that'd be kind of silly, right? Because in Ireland, they speak English. So in our homeland, in the Russian Federation, they speak Russian. So Russian is a language of use for our children as well. And so there's lots of YouTube videos that, and lots of series, specifically Nastya or Fixikis or things of that nature that the children will watch. And so they will pick up a lot of the Russian there. and then whether my wife is mimicking the characters that she's seeing or singing songs or putting on a persona to do those things, that's where Russian will get introduced. But I would say that the way, and Tetsu, you and I have spoken about this in the past, the way that we kind of bend the rule a little bit about one parent, one language is by adopting a persona, right? So the last example I'll give you, yes, Rita.
Yeah, I just wanted sorry, to butt in. I suppose you don't have that in Circassian either. What you are describing, we would normally call minority language at home. So the kind of the generic explanation of one parent or one person, one language, is that the languages are different. So for you, that you are describing, to me at least, an ideal and very well set up a minority language at home scenario, where the whole home is kind of dedicated to the minority language. And it's also, by the way, research has shown that is the most effective way of passing on a language. It's more effective than what we see as one parent, one language, when there are two different languages.
Well, three for us, but it's always nice when research validates what we've kind of accidentally stumbled into.
It's a good point, and I would also add that a lot of times one person, one language and minority at home can overlap.
Oh yeah.
Oh yes.
So
yes,
that's
we're proof of that. We're proof of that. But it is interesting that the two last things that I'll kind of share before I finish answering your question. When I help my son with homework, again, my Circassian does not have the rich volume of words around like multiplication, addition. We barely have a word for science. We kind of construct a word to use that for that. So what I've done also is I've adopted a persona. My children call me Baba rather than Papa, mostly because I grew up calling my father Baba because he's from the Middle East. So when I help my son with his homework, I actually put on a cap and a pair of fake glasses, and I come out and I say, this is not Baba, this is Mr. Baba. Mr. Baba's a teacher, and Mr. Baba's here to help you. And Mr. Baba speaks about 60% Circassian and 40% English, right? And so that's how we signal to him that this is again, we bend the rules. It's a different habit. We're forming a new habit that Mr. Baba is allowed to speak English, whereas, Baba does not speak English. And then the last thing, because I know this comes up quite a lot, the other day we were at the park and we came across a couple that was, the woman was from Greece, and the father was Albanian from Albania, right? So first generation here. And they were lamenting that their 18-month-old is only speaking English because they don't have a common language other than English. Well, 50% of what I speak to my wife in is probably English. We don't really pay that much attention. We kind of code switch all the time. But again, we don't have words like health insurance in my language. We don't have words like bank account in my language. So by necessity, a lot of these modern words just kind of flow in. And oftentimes, because we are so fluid, we'll just switch languages rather than adopt a word. That doesn't seem to have any impact on our children. In fact, I remember I had to run to the bank and I said to my wife, I think I said to her in English, I have to run to the bank and make a deposit or something along those lines. My son heard what I was saying and then asked me in Circassian why I had to go to the bank. So the fact that we are a little sloppy with one another about which language we speak, for us, it has no observable impact on our children because the habit that we formed with them is to speak to us in Circassian. And finally, what's really important, and it makes my heart warm, I see this a lot, especially among Circassian speakers. There's a forced nature of speaking to the child in Circassian. And so what ends up happening is they grudgingly answer because they won't get the candy if they don't answer. They won't get dinner. They won't watch the cartoon. Our children speak to each other in Circassian. That's how we know that it's actually their preferred first language. And they joke around the same way we joke around. So like, you know, we call, my son's name is Osmond, but in Circassian we call him Wes. So Wes says to Sabina, I'm gonna kick your butt in English, and then they go back to gibbering in Circassian again, right? So they do the same thing we do with the introduction of these little taglines or cultural references.
That's amazing. And what I really find, you know, is really a genius way to have another persona, because this question, like you say, it comes up a lot. Parents would ask us, you know, you speak Mandarin with the kids, but what if they see you speak Japanese with your wife, or, you know, whatever language with other people? And I always tell them that's irrelevant. And you hit the, you know, the nail right on the head. What is important is your habit of speaking that specific language with your child, and his or her habit of speaking it back to you. And that association must be very strong. And so, and so you said what, 98% Circassian and then 1 or 2% otherwise. I think that's, you know, that's marvelous, because they know that that 1 or 2% is a special case.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even call it, I would call that 100%, because if there is no word, then you're using what languages have done throughout history. We are borrowing a word from another language. So I wouldn't even say that it's 98%. It's just that doesn't exist. So you have to use an English word, and you make a loan word into Circassian. So. Yeah.
Yes, and what I wanted to add is, yes, like Rita said before, it's more like having the minority language at home in your home with Circassian, and then what you create with the persona.
Yeah.
Maybe you have also other kind of moments where you switch to English, or you switch to Russian for several reasons, maybe because there are not the words, or because the situation requires it, like when you do homework. We have the same in our home as well. So then we are in the in the school language mode, and you are then also in the school language mode. So sometimes we don't need a head or something to say, but it's the situation, which would be then the strategy of time and place, right? It's right. The time of doing homework, or the place outside of home, or with specific people around who do not speak Circassian, for example. That's very natural what you're explaining here. That happens in many multilingual families, no matter what languages they have. Yes.
You know, the other thing that is just worth, and I don't think that this is unique to minority languages, but I'm just thinking of some of the questions that I hear multilingual parents or aspirational multilingual parents ask me. And I'm no expert. I'm just a guy who's been swimming upstream and making progress. We'll see how much longer we're able to make that progress, especially
and
with my
become an expert along the way, I would say.
Yeah, fingers crossed, fingers crossed. But this is probably, I don't have any background in formal linguistics. I'm not trained in this at all. But and this may not be the right word for me, but in my opinion, or my experience, children print a persona on every human being that they meet. Okay, and it's almost it's in the first minute. Okay, so friendly guy, mean lady, tall, short, and I think the best, most relevant example would be wearing glasses, right? So if you've ever been around a small child and they've only ever known you to wear glasses, and then you take off those glasses, they think you're a different person, right? It is such a defining component and characteristic of the multivariable tapestry of the personality that they've constructed mentally for that human being, that it's cataclysmic. It would almost be like having plastic surgery, right? In that same vein, very, very quickly, very early on, children print their preferred language or their default language onto the person that they're speaking, right? So as an example, sometimes when we're in public, you know, we'll go to the cashier, we'll buy some candy or something for my son or my daughter, and the person will say, here's your candy, little boy. And I'll say thank you. And he gets very shy because I'm speaking to him in English. All right. However, if I then say to him in Circassian, thank you, je pense. So I say, thank you, right? This is so I'm telling him in Circassian, you need to say this English word. Thank you, je pense, right? then he actually feels very comfortable saying thank you because I have interacted with him in the Circassian language, right? Another example, my brother, my wife's name is Margarita. We call her Margot. My brother married a girl who is a Russian speaker named Margarita. We call her Rita. And the first time that my son met her, she spoke to him in Russian. And so even though her English is fine, she's been living in the United States since she was 6 years old, but he's printed Russian onto her. So he speaks Russian to her. She's the only person in our entire family that he speaks Russian to as a default language, because even though he knows she speaks English, he's just printed that language onto her. So that's just something worth pointing out as well.
Oh, and I can vouch to that as well. I'm a grandmother, and I moved to the UK from Finland at 22 years ago. Oh yeah, 22 years ago, and with two daughters, 6 and 13 at the time, and we spoke Swedish together, and we still, after 22 years, the default language is Swedish, and we only. Of course, we're all fluent in English, but we wouldn't start speaking English with each other unless there's some other reason why we need to do it. So imprinting it early, sticking to it, and keeping the habit will stay, and it's now passing on to the next generation because my other daughter is speaking Swedish to her sons who are born here. So
that's great.
Yeah.
It's very powerful stuff, and I sort of feel that contributes to the power of one person, one language, where you have strengthen that first impression and just really make it stick, and then later maybe you can talk use other languages and still be able to have your first solid language. Yeah. Anyways, okay, well let's switch gears a little bit. So Circassian. If I Google Circassian, I see the Wikipedia page, but I don't think I'm going to be very successful in finding a lot of material to teach our kids. You speak to them in Circassian. What else do you do? I mean, how do you have books? How do you teach them other than just speaking?
If you Google learn Circassian, or other than the Wikipedia article that you just referenced, there's a very, very good chance that 8 out of 10 of the links that you find will be mine, right? So over the last 10 years, I have become the most prolific author of any Circassian learning materials, let alone in the English language, which is even rarer. And so a lot of the books that you see behind me, these are actually books from our homeland. Where Circassian is written in them, but a lot of these books were developed during the Soviet era, and I'm not trying to say anything mean here, but educational methods have advanced since the collapse of the Soviet Union, right? So books that are 20 or 30 years old, I don't care if they were published in the EU or the United States or in the Soviet Union, there are better methods today than there were back then, right? So that's part of the challenge. In our case, I'm going to go in two directions here, and they're a little contradictory, but just bear with me, okay? I don't believe that it is necessary to have any sort of public media or materials in order to really, really speak a language, right? Now, there's a caveat to that, because the language that I speak is competing with everything that's available on Disney. It's competing with everything that's available on YouTube, right? And so there is just more volume of materials in competing languages, whether they be English or Russian, in my case, than there are in my language, okay? Now, that can be overcome, right? It can be easily overcome, because I think most responsible parents are going to limit their children's screen time, right? And so this infinite universe of media gets compressed down to an hour a day of screen time, or whatever it is that the parent allows for. And so that's one mitigating factor. Having said that, I think one of the issues with minority or rare or endangered languages, such as Circassian, which a lot of people don't talk about, is that over time, in my opinion, all speakers of the language develop an inferiority complex, right? So think about this for just a moment. Every Disney cartoon you can imagine is available in English and in Russian and in Mandarin and in Japanese and in, many, many, many mainstream languages. Why are they not available in Circassian? It must be because Circassian is not as good or not as valuable, not as special, not as powerful, right? And, whether you are a 3-year-old or a 13-year-old, this idea develops, and it may not be as sophisticated as what I'm articulating right now, but it develops over time, right? Why are there no coloring books in my language? Why do so few people on the street speak in my language? Why did we not create these materials? Maybe we as a people are not as smart as those other big nationalities. Maybe we're not as special. We're not as powerful. We don't have as many resources. And so, it's human nature. Do you want to bet on the winning horse, or do you want to be part of the losing team, right? And so that's something that has to be constantly overcome. Now, in our case, I think the way that we've overcome that is we wholeheartedly, enthusiastically speak our language, right? So now my children are 3 and soon to be 6 in another month or so. And I'll be the first person to say, in as much as I've come further than most people ever thought I would. I mean, I live in the United States, and my nearly 6-year-old son still speaks Circassian as his primary language. I have no idea how much further this will go, right? When he was born, people said, oh, good luck, it's not going to work. Wait until he starts gibbering, right? Wait until he goes to daycare. Wait until he starts making friends. Wait until he goes to public school. Well, we've hit all those milestones and we're still doing okay. But eventually, English will become more dominant. So I don't know when that's going to happen. But right now, as his parents, we are the coolest people on the planet. So the fact that we speak Circassian to him helps to mitigate the fact that Circassian, is not as cool as some of these other languages that are out there. So that's one half of the equation. The other half of the equation is that, unlike anybody I've ever met when it comes to a rare language or an endangered language, we've actually done a lot to try to mitigate some of those issues that I just described. So for example, through the NASIP Foundation, the organization that I had referenced before, my wife and I, with the help and support of a few other people, we created a animated / live action YouTube series called Little Aslan. And if you go to YouTube and you just type Little Aslan, you'll see that there are 24 5-minute episodes that were designed to teach 200 or 300, I think they're called Fleischmann sight words, whatever the technical term for it is, 200 words in context. Every episode's only 5 minutes long, two and a half, 5 minutes long, somewhere in that ballpark. And every single word is repeated 3 to 5 times in that episode. We provide the word on the screen so that the word itself is an image. We provide the image of the object on the screen as a cartoon image, as well as a real life image. There's audio that's embedded within it. We show the object on a standalone basis, and we show the object in everyday life usage, again, both in animation style as well as in live action style, right? So as a result of that, we're hitting all the senses except for, taste and touch and smell. We're hitting all the senses. We're doing this whether you think you can read or you don't want to read, whether it's preferred animation style or preferred live action style. All that repetition is in there. And so that's one thing that we've done to help elevate the status of Circassian, because now our kids say, oh, we have YouTube videos as well. Among this pile of books that are behind me, there's about a half a dozen of them that are in fact children's activity and children's coloring books that I authored. And I actually went and had them printed so they look like real coloring books. They're not Xeroxed and just stapled together. And then the last thing is we've created physical flashcards in our home. You know, I went so far as to, you know, get all the special paper, get them on the semi-laminate sheets. I even bought a special machine that would cut them with rounded edges so they wouldn't be sharp and they look like the high production quality stuff that's sold in the stores. And so, in as much as I just said, you don't need that stuff, in our household, we spent a lot of time and effort going to build a lot of that stuff as well. So that's a little bit of a contradiction.
Well, I don't know, Rita and Nuta, what do you think the distance that Jonty goes to really have the kids feel that Circassian is an important language, to have them feel pride and the need to speak Circassian. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yes, I'm amazed by a lot of things that you are doing to maintain Circassian with your children. We also have a language in our family, one of the four languages that we speak with our children, Swiss German, and it's not written, so we cannot read it. We cannot have many books. I mean, there are some comic books or very short story books, but for the rest, it's really all audiobooks. We had audiobooks that helped us a lot with this. I didn't prepare many of these resources that you did, but I was wondering, now what you're doing is amazing. May I ask for what age groups you are doing these? Because I think my children are all teenagers, and I know that at some point, like you said before, comes a moment where the school language becomes the most dominant one in their life. It's just inevitable. But how do you think you can maintain then the interest of your children for Circassian once maybe you're running behind with producing resources? I know I did, yes. And I wonder, what are your plans, or what do you see in the future?
So having developed a handful of these materials, I don't have right now plans to produce anything in the near future. And there's a couple of reasons for that. In terms of the age that they were designed for, when my son was 6, I developed stuff for him that would be appropriate for a when my son was 6 months old, still just barely even gibbering, I said, you know, he's going to start speaking soon. Let me start making some stuff that might be appropriate for a 6-month-old. And then by the time I was done, he was a year-old. So then, you know, let me start making stuff that's good for a 12-month-old. And now he's a 1.5-year-old. And of course, those have become hand-me-downs to his sister. And there are literally tens of thousands of ethnic Circassian children who have benefited from these materials as well. So that's kind of how that all happened. I do have a series of written materials, self-study guides, lecture materials that are designed for teenagers and adults. And then also Circassian is a language that's available on the Optolingo platform. There's 20 languages on the platform. Circassian is the only one that's not really commercially viable, but it is available on the platform, and that's really for anybody above the age of 13, I would say. In terms of how we continue to make Circassian valuable or interesting or compelling, I don't know. The honest to God truth, you know, I remember one time we were in Japan, actually, we were getting on the metro to go grab dinner. Tetsu very respectfully, and I think he almost didn't know how to ask the question, but he did it very, very kindly and very respectfully. He asked me, why are you doing what you're doing? Right? Because, and it's a very fair question, by the way, because among the languages that Tetsu is teaching to his children, they're all what I would call useful languages, right? You can get a job or go live or work in a country or work for a company in a country that uses Mandarin or French or English or Japanese or Spanish, right? All of these are commercially valuable languages. Circassian is not commercially valuable. It's not, and that's just the honest to God truth. So when the children are little, it's the language of necessity because it's what they speak to their parents in, right? Now, when the decline of the Circassian language has been so dramatic and so severe over just the last 10 years. I mean, it's just really, really come out of left field, almost to the extent that COVID has come out of left field and just decimated, you know, so much of the economy. That's the analogy I'm using. I don't know. I originally thought Circassian will be useful because that's the language he'll use to speak to his relatives in when he goes to visit the homeland, right? Very few of the children in the homeland, in our homeland, speak Circassian. Now, I don't know I don't know if I have a language loving gene or if there's something cultural or something like that. But fortunately, most of my relatives and most of my wife's relatives do raise their children to speak Circassian. But even them, you know, it's fading out. So I don't know. I frankly don't know what's going to continue to make that language a relevant or interesting or even useful aspect of his life. But, and Tetsu, you're not the only person who's asked me that question. My wife asks me this question. And the answer that I give is, I want my son, I want my daughter, I want my children to have choice. I did not grow up speaking this language, and I've always had something missing deep down. I wasn't quite sure what it was. And I think every Circassian feels this, whether it's big or small, and maybe every speaker of a heritage language feels this. It's this feeling of, how can I be X when I don't speak X's language? Right? How can I be Circassian if I don't speak Circassian? Maybe I'm not a real Circassian, whatever the heck that might happen to mean. I don't know what that means, but I think that's a rhetorical question that a lot of people ask themselves. So I want to give my children a choice. I want to give them an option. What they do as they get older, that's their call. My goal is to keep this language alive until they're teenagers, because then it'll be strong enough in their brains that they probably won't forget it. And if they choose to not use it, that's their choice. I never had that choice. My choice was zero. I did not have it, right? And the last thing
your children are going to thank you for that. Absolutely. I've heard that so many times from adults who have either grown up with their heritage language or not grown up with, and it's 100%. Those who didn't learn it regret it. So I wish my mom and dad would have taught it. One question I wanted to ask is there currently available, like, education, any level of education in Circassian anywhere in the world?
Yes. So as we look out into the world, the areas where Circassians live, okay, we are, let me start from the diaspora and work in, because it gets more complex as we go to the homeland. So in the United States, there is a Sunday school at the Circassian Benevolent Association in Wayne, New Jersey. I taught at that school for 10 years. I don't live in New Jersey anymore, but that's a Sunday school. So, you know, there's a limitation to what you can do in a Sunday school format. Moving into Europe, there's virtually nothing. When you go into Turkey, because of language reform laws that were passed, predominantly due to lobbying from ethnic Kurds, Circassians have benefited. And so if you go to, I'm going to butcher the name of this town. It's just west of Istanbul. I think it's called Druzhba or Duzhba or something like that. There is a university there that does teach the Western dialect of Circassian. And so Circassian has two dialects, and then it has two literary dialects, then a handful of other dialects that have never been written. So to your point, Uta, about Swiss German, we have a similar, we have a variety of similar dialects. And I would say that the differences or similarities, but they are mutually intelligible with a little bit of thinking about it. It's probably kind of like Portuguese and Spanish, right? And the Westerners are kind of like Portuguese speakers. They can understand my dialect pretty easily, but Eastern speakers have to think a little bit. It takes a few days of adjustment to really figure out the Western dialect. So in, I think it's Druzhba, I think that's the town. They do have university level instruction there. In Syria, there were some schools before the war. There is a Royal Jordanian school where Circassian is the language of instruction. I think there's about a half a dozen schools across Turkey, one of which is in Çorum. My cousin, Mehmet Yamish, he's the teacher there, where they do teach it as a foreign language. And then that brings us to the homeland. In the Russian Federation, there are three titular republics, semi-autonomous republics, similar to, and when we say semi-autonomous, it's literally similar to or analogous to the relationship that Hong Kong has with mainland China, right? So it's a semi-autonomous region. Chechnya is the most popular, most well-known of the semi-autonomous titular republics within the North Caucasus. The Chechen people are not Circassians, but there are three titular republics that the Circassians live in. There is Kabardino-Balkaria, there's Qarasheva-Cherkessia, and then there's Adygea. Within those three republics, there's really just one where Circassian is still a language that is instructed, and it's Kabardino-Balkaria. That's where my family is from. And there still may be a little bit in Adygea, but due to a series of language reform laws that have been enacted over the last year or two, Circassian, not just Circassian, national languages of the Russian Federation are no longer compulsory. Right. So prior to a few years ago, if you were a member of whatever, a certain volume of ethnicities among these titular nations, it would be mandated, I think, 4 hours of instruction per week or 2.5 hours of instruction per week. That mandate has now been removed. So it's now optional. And of course, that's a weakening of the amount of volume of instruction that's available. So that's a summary of where Circassian is available for instruction in the world.
Well. I listened to you talk, and it's just nothing short of inspirational. And I think what you mentioned earlier, really giving the children a choice in different formats. I mean, I also think about, maybe they don't care about languages, the 5 that I teach them, but I want them to have that choice. If they don't want to use it, fine. But not the other way around. There's just, and we all see so many cases of children who grow up in their teenage years, and then they sort of go, my roots, I want to know about my roots, and they have to start from zero, or even from a negative starting line, I would say, when they have to learn that language, learn the culture, and then finally start the investigation and all that. And this choice that you're giving them, this option, and this conviction that you have, I think, is really one very important key to your success for such a difficult language. So chapeau to you once again.
I would say you're really inspirational. I'm so happy you came on, because there are many parents who are in a similar situation who would just think, oh, it's not possible. And you are actually proving the opposite. It is possible. And also, even that is worth doing, just because of the thing that your children can connect to their heritage. And like you say, they have the option. That's the way my children grew up. One of their languages was Punjabi, which was their dad's language. I didn't understand anything of that, but I still insisted on their dad speaking Punjabi, because how I saw it, very similar to you, Jonty, was that it's my responsibility as a parent to give them the option, so they don't have to, like you said, Tetsu, as 40-year-olds start looking for their root and not understanding where they come from. So yeah, I think it's very inspirational.
Yeah.
Yes. If I may add, because I think you gave me the answer to my question, how you will maintain these languages, or this language later on, is by opening the world to your children and showing them, although it might not be a language that is spoken everywhere, but it's still spoken. It is somewhere, it is taught. You're not the only one. And what you're passing on, actually, and your wife, the way that you're passing it on makes a big difference, because you value that language. And by valuing the language and by the passion that you have, you're giving them the message, this is a language to be loved, to be cherished, to be passed on to the next generation, possibly. And I think that is the big difference, that many parents who are in the situation and they consider, can I pass on this language that is not among the most spoken languages in the world? Maybe you don't find books in them, in it, or will my child ever live in a country where this language is spoken? There are so many questions that come to mind, and we had these in our family as well. But what was most important was actually to give them the opportunity to choose. At some point in their life, they might go there. They might also meet someone from those places. And then having this security of saying, oh, I know what this means. I understand what you're saying. Maybe they cannot read or write it like my children because there are no texts, but they can converse. They can make themselves understood. And this is a great gift. The other day, I was talking with someone and I said, okay, we're planting seeds. No matter if these seeds then become a big tree or a flower, the flower is beautiful as well. No matter how big it is, it's really valuable anyways. And they can foster them also later on, should they at some point, I wouldn't say abandon them, but not be able to really speak them and nurture them continuously. That's amazing.
And then another thing which I've noticed, especially with Punjabi for my daughters who are now both adults, since they can fluently communicate in Punjabi, they have established their own relationships as adults with the extended family. They do not need their dad to be the go-between. And that's such an important thing for you to think about as well, Jonty, because they will have that. So we have to think like a generation forward and thinking, well, when I'm not there, will it all end? But no, it won't, because you've established that strong habit of using the language, and they can use it themselves to build and maintain the relationships.
Yeah, you know, that's a point that bears underscoring. I remember 2 years ago, it was the first time. Every summer my wife takes our children to our homeland, and it was the first year that my son went and was actually, you know, speaking, right? And I spoke to him right after he arrived, and I asked him, you know, how do you like it there? And he looks at me and goes, Baba, every child here speaks my language. And that's when it occurred to me that at 3.5 years old, he had never spoken this language to another child.
Wow.
He had only spoken it to adults. That's a shocking thing. Later on that day, my wife sent me a video and some pictures of him with cousins on her side of the family and my side of the family all playing together. And he's speaking to them with no issues, no problems. And it brought a tear to my eye, because I remember as a child, my mom and dad would bring me to Syria. We couldn't go to Russia because it was the Cold War. So we went to Syria to visit, you know, my cousins. And I didn't speak Arabic and I didn't speak Circassian. And so I always had to go through an intermediary to engage with my blood, with my own relatives. And so just now, the fact that my son and my daughter, whether it's through Russian or whether it's through Circassian, whether my relatives are in Turkey where they speak Circassian, or the Middle East where they speak Circassian, or in Russia where they speak Circassian, they can engage them on their own terms. They don't need me as an intermediary or their mom to negotiate those dialogues.
Jonty, you are bringing tears to my eyes right now as you speak. I mean, really, it's an amazing discussion today that we had. Right around the end, we're actually getting a few comments from our viewers. Perhaps we could pick up a few. Uta or
Yes,
Rita?
yes, I just wanted, there is a Leo who says, very interesting topic, good work, Jonty. So we have some followers that are really saying, thank you very much for sharing, it's amazing. There is a question or a comment from Martukis. I'm doing OPO, me English and my dad Spanish, even if I'm not a native, and I'm happy to hear about your experience. Thanks for this talk.
That's right. We should not forget Jonty learned Circassian at 31 years old.
Yeah.
We get this a lot for major languages, minor languages. You know, how do I teach, you know, a non-native tongue to our children? It's so difficult. I don't pronounce it right, or et cetera, et cetera. Maybe with that in mind, we could wrap this up with a little message from you, Jonty, to our viewership.
Sure.
How to overcome all these issues on teaching a minority language, or even your second or third language.
The two things that I hear almost all the time are it's impossible or it's hard, right? Neither of those are true, right? The fact, I'm not alone, but the fact that one human being can do something by definition means it's not impossible, right? So that's not a true fact. It's hard. There's no such thing as anything that's hard in this world, okay? I had a professor in graduate school who said, how hard could Mandarin be? There's hundreds of millions of 5-year-olds who speak it, right?
Exactly.
So there's no such thing as hard. There is what we value and what we make time for, okay? So if you value multilingual heritage speaking, or even if it's not a heritage, if you value speaking multiple languages in the household, and you value them enough to make time, you will be successful.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be my parting thoughts.
Words of wisdom. Words of wisdom. We all have 24 hours a day. God's been fair to all of us. How do you prioritize it based on what you are looking for in your life? What you're looking for, you know, what you value for your children will determine whether you have success or not.
Yep.
Thank you, Jonty. Thank you so much
you
for a fantastic discussion. So for those who are watching us right now, thank you for watching. For those who are watching the recording, for all of you out there, be inspired. And from us, from Raising Multilinguals Live, we would also love to hear your comments, your feedback. I'm going to press enter right now in the chat box to send you a link for you to click on to provide feedback for any further sessions. So that's a wrap for today. I'll have Uta provide a little preview for our next session. So please give me a second. I will put up hang on. So Uta will tell us about our next session in 2 weeks. Hang on, let me, there you go.
Yes, exactly. I'm very happy to announce that our guest on Tuesday, the 6th of October, will be Professor Mila Schwartz from the Oranim Academic College of Education in Israel. She will be focusing on the important role children play, their behavior, their self-image, and their response to many factors when choosing a language strategy. So please save the date, Tuesday, 6th October at 1 p.m. New York, 6 p.m. London, or 7 p.m. Paris time.
All right, thank you, Uta. Once again, thank you, Jonty, and thank you to all our viewership. We will see you in 2 weeks, next month, October 6th. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.